The next few minutes will answer so many questions. Byron Donalds is one of the most promising future names for the Republican Party, and his conversation with commentator Stephen A. Smith shows an intellectual depth to him that Donald Trump probably wants on his side. And you know what? Byron may even be better at presenting the case than Donald Trump himself. And I'll tell you why it's so important for the VP shortlist that Trump is probably making right now. But before I get into that, watch Byron challenge the establishment narrative on many of the current court cases surrounding the former president.
How at this point could you possibly support Donald Trump?
First of all, I'll tell you right now, between him and Joe Biden, this isn't even a question. Joe Biden sucks. He's terrible at the job. And we do have to acknowledge that before COVID-19, despite all the circus and the phony investigations, the Russia collusion thing was phony. That's now come out to be proven. Despite all of the distractions in the circus, he actually did the job as president of the United States. Every demographic group was doing well under Donald Trump. Every demographic group was doing well. Our border was secure. There were no foreign wars that anybody was talking about that we were entangled in. Our country was booming. Energy prices were low. We were energy independent, something that every politician had said that they wanted to do. Donald Trump actually was able to make all that stuff happen.
And you know why that matters? I think it should be clear to everyone that you should expect a gap in Donald Trump's rhetoric and actual policy. Trump's fiery rhetoric has gotten him in trouble with the mainstream media several times, including things like remarks after Charlottesville or the infamous Muslim ban he called for before the 2016 election. But despite all its faults, the Trump presidency was a departure from much of the scaremongering that had been happening in the years prior, and not just in his policy positions or social issues or foreign policy, but even just the economy and governance that have taken a dive ever since. A poll from CBS shows just a few months ago how nearly 2/3 of Americans say they remember the economy as being better under the Trump presidency than right now. The average year-on-year inflation rate under Donald Trump stood at 1.9%, while the number under Biden stands at 5.7%. If Trump's governance was not a very high bar, then the last 3 years don't bode well for the Joe Biden image. I think that's largely the problem. The choice presented to the American people is practically a binary between these two candidates, and choosing one over the other is often just a decision of who's relatively less worse or relatively better than the other. That's what you see here with someone like Representative Byron Donalds, who hasn't even served in a Trump administration, yet being elected in 2021, and he already takes into account the good and bad from each one.
Now let's look at the actual charges. Do you mean to tell me that because a president of the United States had classified documents, who, by the way, former presidents still have their security clearance, they still get the daily presidential briefing, that now somehow this is a threat to national security? That is a joke, especially considering the fact that the only way the National Archives could even bring this charge, or the FBI and the Department of Justice could bring this charge, is that the White House counsel, who works for Joe Biden, had to allow it. That's one. Two, what's going on in Georgia, I'm sorry, flat out wrong. Every candidate who runs is allowed to challenge election results. Every candidate. It's not some RICO charge. That's insane to me.
That's a case that has been chasing the former president for years at this point, but between the Presidential Records Act and the NARA, Donald Trump has denied any allegation attempts to conceal sensitive records at the Mar-a-Lago resort. The Section 2020-03 Presidential Record Act is often cited in this regard as giving the president with the view of the archivist the power to, quote, dispose of those presidential records of such president that no longer have administrative, historical, informational, or evidentiary value. But no matter the legal back and forth that has happened, Donald Trump's indictment under something as serious as the Espionage Act has raised eyebrows among his base for the motives of the case itself, with Trump becoming the highest-ranking former public official to face an investigation under the act in U.S. history. But if you zoom out, this is actually one of Trump's lesser problems at the moment, because the alleged insurrection on January 6th remains the center of his legal troubles that threaten to knock over his campaign.
Now let's get to the insurrection. I'm going to shock you here. I do think he incited. I do think he was irresponsible. I do not believe it was criminal. I do not believe that. The criminals are the ones that busted into the Capitol. The criminals are the ones that did those things. Not him saying he did use the word peacefully, because I'm no fan of the, I've known, and I'll tell you that story in a second.
He did say that.
He did use the word peacefully. He did say that. All right. They want to ignore that, but it's the truth. I got to say that.
Donalds has an uncanny ability to chip through the haze with questions like this. When you're dealing with something like alleging insurrection, the parameters of that conversation and the definition of each word needs to be tightly defined. It's a credit to Stephen A. Smith perhaps that he at least remembers Trump using the word peaceful, because that's likely to become one of the greatest offenses in court, but there's no explicit footage or record available of Donald Trump calling for a violent storming of the Capitol. Now, do I know which one it was in the end? That's not for us to decide because the layman only has the plain facts to go by, and when it comes to connecting that straight line from Trump's words to the rioters storming the Capitol, it's vital that facts are made the foundation of any such allegation. For safe measure, here's a clip of Donald Trump calling for a peaceful and patriotic protest on January 6th, which are words that Trump is probably grateful that he used at the time.
We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Today we will see whether Republicans stand strong for integrity of our elections, but whether or not they stand strong for our country.
Going simply by phrases and statements, there's nothing technically illegal about peacefully protesting or questioning the integrity of election until the moment that there's an explicit call for it to turn violent. Now, perhaps Trump isn't helping his image when he says things like calling the people arrested on that day for breaking into the building as hostages. In the war of narratives and rhetoric, Trump can sometimes go overboard and only give one more ammo to his detractors.
A couple things. First, I'll say with respect to the January 6th charges, yes, he said peacefully. We'll go to the Capitol. We'll protest peacefully. And in every one of his statements, he's always saying we'll protest, but we protest peacefully and we follow the law. The other thing I will add about January 6th, because of my time on the Oversight Committee, is Donald Trump authorized 10,000 National Guard troops on January 4. So if he was trying to have violence at the Capitol, why would he authorize National Guard troops 2 days before to be at the Capitol? And the only person who said no to the National Guard being at the Capitol was Nancy Pelosi, because Nancy Pelosi, being Speaker of the House at the time, is in charge of Capitol security. I know they don't report on this stuff, but that's the stuff that came out in the Oversight Committee.
I think it's the fact that Byron Donalds brings a cooler and more rational head to the current Republican establishment that makes him such a useful force for the party. Right now, he's underutilized for what he can truly bring, but that may be about to change because sources have revealed how Donald Trump's shortlist for a potential vice president pick actually includes Byron as well. We may or may not see a potential VP Byron, but no one can say that someone like him isn't welcome and needed as an addition for the party moving forward.